I'm interrupting all of that. But it's time to do our plenary panel, or we won't have time to go back to sessions later this afternoon. I'm Nancy Davenport. I'm the university librarian, and on behalf of the library and all my colleagues, we are really happy to see all of you here. Very happy. I also want to thank all of the faculty members who have volunteered their time to serve as panelists. Talking to your colleagues has been, I think, a rich discussion in whichever session that you've been in. We've had people Skype in to serve as presenters as well. John Tubman and his colleague Jim Casey have been our partners in doing this, and we're delighted to have that companionship, and particularly for bringing in the funders. There is one panel this afternoon that is outsiders, and the outsiders at this conference are grant funders, and they're here to talk to you all about how to submit grants to their agencies. So we're delighted to have that particular panel and John's good offices in putting that panel together. I wanted to do my introductory remarks by talking about why we came up with doing this conference, and then thank the people who put it together. And most of you in the academic world know library is a place. It's a place where you've gone to study as students. It's a place where you go to do research. But it's the most common way that people think of library, as a place. It's also a collection. And it's where we've built that collection of electronic resources and paper-based resources that you have used throughout your careers, then you assign to your students, and that you may use for your own scholarly research. You probably know that in this library, we're part of a consortium throughout the city. And as times have changed over, there are 9 universities, and AU used to sit as sort of the pivot point between the big ones and the little ones. And we actually seem to have moved up to the 4th place behind the Georges for being the library with the next largest collection and the ability to expend collections, particularly on materials that faculty need. We're also providing to you materials we don't even own, and I want you to know how you help us do collection development. We are buying electronic books, and we load those books. They're available in the catalog as if we own them. And when you click on them and read a chapter, read the whole thing, after so many people do that, the library ends up buying it. But we regard it as evidence-based decision-making. You've let us know that you really needed these resources, and we only pay for those that actually get used. So it's a more streamlined way, but it's also an immediate way of having you and your students get access to the materials. You've come to the library for expertise in a variety of ways, from the first reference-based to research design to research kinds of assistance, but we've added in any academic library additional resources, particularly GIS and research data and research identity are the 3 that we have particularly added to it, with people on the staff or on the faculty involved in each one of those. But we also have that traditional role as library as convener, and typically it's bringing outsiders to the library or to the campus to talk to people. And the library does a social justice lecture series where we bring in literally people working in that field. And Peter had a commencement speaker who has already agreed to come back to campus and do a fireside with us. And it was Patty Stonecipher, who runs Martha's Table, which is a big charity in the DC area. And she said she won't come back to do a lecture because that requires a lot of preparation, and she does not have that kind of time. But if we have students prepare, she's happy to do a dialogue with students at a mutually convenient time. But we also think of the next role of the library as a collaborator. And it's in that role today that we've invited you all here to be your collaborator in doing research, to help you with your research data, with research methods, with your research identity, and help you in any way you can as a collaborator. We have librarians who are embedded in AU 2030 projects and would like to see them in all of those projects. But as we can be good collaborators with you, we want to do that. So I want to thank the people who put this together, because this will be my only opportunity to have everybody here to hear the group that put this together. Gwendolyn Reese, Melissa Becker, Olivia Ivy, Catherine Simpson, Rachel Borchardt, Michael Pillar, Jonathan Silberman, and Dania Freeman, standing there in the back, is our events coordinator, and she was conference coordinator. And with that, let me briefly introduce the three people who probably need almost no introduction except to our guest. Scott Bass is the provost of the university, and he's going to be doing the opening stage-setting remarks on the topic, and he will then be followed by three deans. The three deans are Jim Goldgeier, the dean of SIS, Barbara Romzek, the dean of School of Public Affairs, and Peter Starr from the College of Arts and Sciences. So each of them have their own scholarly fields, the provost being gerontology, Jim's being international relations, and I've seen in his work a particular focus on Russia. Barbara's being government accountability, even to accountability for an airplane crash that killed Ron Brown. And Peter's being French and German literature, and so much so that the French gave him a big, big medal, right. For which he should be able to have little red things embroidered on his suits. So I'm pleased to have the three of my colleagues here, in addition to the provost, to start this conversation. Scott, you want to begin?
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy, and the team that helped put this together, and John for making this possible. It's an important topic, and my understanding that there was a wait list for the lunch, so that's very nice to see the participation after a series of major events on campus. We had, over this weekend, 5 major graduations, of which both Nancy and John were there for all 5. And in that powerful and exciting and high energy event, all of which were very, very successful, all of the speakers and the students speaking all spoke about impact. They talk about social responsibility. They talked about teamwork and working collaboratively on larger scale issues. And one can't help it, after repeatedly hearing these messages, of what does that mean for us as faculty, who are the creators of knowledge and in positions of influence, authority, and power. The topic today is high impact research, and in particular the importance of public impact. And certainly we have nationally and historically examples of brilliant faculty who have contributed to the public discourse. Some of you can think of someone like a Carl Sagan and his love for the cosmos, and how that became really educational fodder for high school, even junior high school, in terms of thinking about space and time. I just read in the paper that Stephen Hawking was saying we must go to discover and live on either moon or planet over the next 100 years. And the argument is that both the damage to this planet, but also the evolution of artificial intelligence. He said that he argues that human evolution moves rather slowly, but artificial intelligence will dramatically increase over the next 100 years, and that will surpass the capacity of human beings, and therefore the need for another location. We've just hired, thanks to the help of both Jim and Peter, an intellectual in the field of history, Ibram Kendi, and they may want to talk about that, who has argued in issues of race that there isn't a single narrative, but there are really streams of narratives, multiple narratives that work their way through history. And he will be creating an anti-racism center on campus, and will be a major force in the national dialogue. We've also seen on our own campus what we mean by multi-investigator, of teams around the world working on a question for years. So the Greg Harry and LIGO, the detection of gravitational waves, is an example where people all over the world are working on a similar question, and that collaboration results in dramatic impact. And the other I want to talk about as an example of, and has not been talked much about on campus, has to do with this notion of collectivity and collaboration, using a similar methodology to arrive at an independent and important finding. And I think the work on the Panama Papers, which Chuck Lewis was really the engineer in the School of Communication to, and he wrote an editorial about that, is organizing investigators over a multi-year effort to focus on one question, which had to do with the distribution of monies in Panama and where those monies came from. Couldn't be done by a single individual. It required a level of teamwork, and it is really a new approach, a fresh methodology that was created by one of our faculty members for investigative journalism. So I think there are examples of large-scale, either individuals who have become, we'd call public intellectual, but also this notion of collaborative work where it defies what a single individual can do. And I will argue that in many fields, it simply has eclipsed what a single person can do if you really do address the question that's before us. But the first slide I want to say is, as a provost and anyone would know, is that the importance of the freedom to pursue research as one chooses, that this panel and this provost is not about to argue that there is a way to do research or to approach a question that belongs to the faculty and the individual. There's a quote here I have on a new book, a chapter that was recently produced by James Soto Anthony, Anna Maria Cause, and Donna Shalala, that says researchers cannot work if their questions are constrained or their research predetermined. Research is first and foremost a professional activity that requires extensive knowledge base. The quality of research depends on the investigator's ability to frame and pursue independent questions. Research is a way of learning. As such, it is intensely personal. It demands diligence, persistence, self-confidence, particularly in the face of the inevitable disappointment when an experiment or line of inquiry goes wrong or is badly received by peers. And I think most of us have experienced the revise and resubmit or the denial or whatever when you're putting out your articles. But first and foremost, this is a research university, and there is no prescription as to what you pursue, but how you pursue it is something we have discussed. And so I put two questions: is what is high impact research, and what is high impact research, as we have discussed in various guidelines that have come forward. Is high impact research is not necessarily publishing in the most convenient or the easiest or the most aligned journal. It's placing it in a spot which is highly competitive, has a high impact factor, which is regularly cited, which is very selective in its work, and it may take a lot longer to get that accepted. And COGOT in one way has developed their A list of journals, but it's one way of saying, look, these are places which are really priority places to put the work. If you're in a book culture, it is obviously some of the priority academic presses, and within each of your fields you know which are the very best in terms of reviews. And it has to do with peer review. For those in arts or humanities, or particularly in the performance worlds, you know where there are different venues that are reviewed. And certainly having it reviewed at cons is different than having it in a local show. So high impact research is work that is rigorously reviewed, is carefully produced, and is put to audiences that may question your work, and that's part of the process, is further refining and developing your work. And why is the placement of work important? It's so that the field and the array of ideas are debated, discussed, and that you are prepared to defend your work, that it promotes this institution in a way that provides us broad visibility as having the leading experts in any single area. And so I put up here my own journal that I started 30 years ago. It's the Journal of Aging and Social Policy. I'm proud of the journal. It is in a niche area between the interface of aging and social policy, and I placed it there just so you know that journal has an impact factor of, depending on the year, between 0.78 and 1. It's okay, but I would be in all honesty, and there's some wonderful editors who serve on the editorial board. I'm now on the editorial board. I'm no longer an editor of the journal and haven't been for a number of years. I would discourage a junior faculty member from placing their work in that journal. I would say you put it in the gerontologist. It's a lot harder to get in, and it's going to get a lot wider reviews, and that maybe later on it's a good place to place your work. So I can say, as an editor, and knowing what goes into the preparation of a journal and what I actually did as an editor, that there are places that are going to benefit the individual and the institution more than the journal that I created. I want to show you this email, and I'll read it for the panelists. It says, "Dear Dr. Bass, one of the articles you authored a while ago caught my attention, and I'm hoping to discuss with you publishing a follow-up article in the Internal Medicine Review. The article was entitled The State of Gerontology, Opus 1, and I do believe it's one of my best papers. I think I even shared it with Jim once. It really is the discussion of foundation of conceptual underpinnings in a multidisciplinary field, which in this case was gerontology, but it's I think my best work. It was a result of a Lifetime Achievement Award I received, and I did this paper. And they go on to say, I'm sure our readers would find the article that continues this work valuable, the parameters of the article flexible, and I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Would you or perhaps one of your students have time to contribute an article this summer? So, looks okay. I should mention I've received a number of other requests for journals asking for articles, and perhaps you might respond. So I looked up, what is the Internal Medicine Review? And there's a board, people from Hopkins, elsewhere, looks very prestigious. But you dig down a little further, and you find out that this is a faux journal. It's a profit-making enterprise that is simply garnering your article. And, for example, the person at Hopkins got a degree from Hopkins and is using that name. And it's all over the world a serious-looking board. I challenge you, when you receive these requests, we have space for such and such a journal on the international of such and such, and I've had 3 or 4 from that different international journals, you need to know that those are the kinds of things that will take your time, that will publish your work, and will have zero value when I review it, and I will look for those kinds of statistics. This is what's going on in our industry. You ought to know it, and you ought to be savvy enough to know what is a high impact and what we mean about it as an institution. So what we did a number of years ago, I believe John chaired it, is we created a high impact research task force, and I put the website up there for you to see it if you want to look at that work. We spent a lot of time on that, and I think perhaps some of the earlier questions is, was the provost trying to tell us what kind of research to do? And the answer is no. I'm not trying to tell you what kind of research to do. And they even created a website that talks about the distinctions between creating the research, the application, and eventual dissemination. And we'll be getting to that clearly in a minute, is the use of the intellectual work broader than the journal. I should say that actually one faculty member I recently had lunch with said to me, my work is so technical and so sophisticated, it's being published in the very best journals. But you know what? I bet there's only 4 people that really know what's in this work. And so what I'm going to do, or I started doing, is I publish in these very, very specialized, important places, and then I take the work and I'm translating it and write it for a wider audience. Now, this is a survey that's done every year by Inside Higher Ed and the Gallup survey, and this year they produced a statistic that 54% of university presidents report, quote, academe is disconnected from much of American society. Now, that's a powerful statement. It says that the specialized research work that we are doing is not connecting to the larger questions that the public and society are concerned with. Now, that's not a thing to pass off. And what I do see, and others comment, as we become, as faculty, looking for the next publication, is sometimes more and more specialized, greater and greater narrowness, a level of specialization which is distinctive to that faculty member. But to what extent does that work address the larger questions that we should be asking? What are the important questions to ask? And can it even be done by an individual? Perhaps it requires a team. And hence, that's what we're here to talk about, is our opportunity here in Washington, D.C. And we've spent time both through the task force, through the regular meetings with deans, about the opportunity we have in Washington to explore some of these broader questions. And one of the things we came up with was AU 2030. And just so you know what we do as a team here at this table, and there are other deans that join us, is every year when we look at the requests for faculty lines, we look at it from a university point of view. Indeed, there'll be the specific specialization that the unit needs, but how does that connect to broader themes that the university can do? Our opportunity is based on being a mid-size university. A mid-size has advantages and it has disadvantages. Compared to the big state universities where they can run 150 faculty in a single discipline, we cannot, we never will. But what we can do, and they have difficulty doing, is identifying essential questions where we can invest resources of faculty lines year after year to have pinnacle areas of work. And so what you would see, and we've opened up for further discussion, are the existing AU 2030 areas of examination. And there's a subcommittee, I believe all of the members are on that, is looking at how do we translate the existing AU 2030 areas into words that have meaning outside our world. And I think an example is health risk in society. That makes some sense to someone reading this from the outside. But big data and environmental studies are too general, lack specificity, and need sharpening. So what we are doing as deans in a subcommittee is looking at this list and determining at this point which have real viability and interest and which need sharpening in terms of language, and working on that. And as you know, we opened up the discussion of AU 2030, 17 proposals received. Again, the subcommittee has now narrowed, and we will be looking at where we should also be investing faculty lines across the campus to build academic strengths. Now, one of the other things we've done historically, and Jim may want to speak to this, is we have some wonderful think tanks, and one of the ideas is, well, these places do academic research. They publish in some of the very best, more book cultures. And so what Jim arranged was a detailed conversation with the equivalent of a provost of one of the major think tanks. It was Brookings, and really talking about how they think about work and its translation to a wider audience. And it's explicit. It's from the very start. And there were things, best practices, I think, to learn that. So right now on our campus is, I would say, we're at a point of the emergence of high-impact translational research. And I think Barbara will talk some about that as well as the other panelists. But the notion that can there be work that involves multiple investigators, going back to a few of the examples, that are broader questions, deeper questions that are also potentially fundable. Perhaps graduate students could work on with you, undergraduate students could work on, that defines and distinguishes this institution from our peers. So it's not just a question of people doing research and being left alone, that goes without saying. It is a question, are there some things that we can do as a mid-sized institution in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, that is a magnet for other investigators to want to be at a place that is interested in elevating the discourse to what are the broader questions, not just what can I get published tomorrow, but what are the broader questions that we can do. And that would be, for some faculty, of interest. But we would support and nurture that as we would support the individual investigator as well. So I view our future, and we're really talking well into the future, as distinctive and impactful. Thank you, and we can turn on to the other panelists.
Jim, before you start your remarks, let me recommend to all of you that if you get the same unknown journal or any journal you have never heard about before, to call the library. There used to be a public list called Beale's List, which was a list of predatory journals. And the people that approached the provost and a few others have decided to sue Thomas Beale, who is a librarian, and to sue his university. And the university made him take down the list because of the consequences of being sued. And he'd done good research. These were, in fact, predatory, but they didn't like that label. So do call upon us when you hear from strangers. Jim.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for the intro remarks. Thanks for inviting me. I just wanted to say a few words about a project that has been going on now for about 13, 14 years called Bridging the Gap. It's been here since 2011, and it's funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and is designed to help academics figure out how to bridge the gap between their academic work and doing policy-relevant research or engaging in work that involves the broader public. And delighted that two members of the team, one of my co-directors, Jordan Tama, is here, and our associate director, Jessica Trisco-Darden, is also here. And I just wanted to say a few things about some of the insights, and especially we've run a training program for PhD students in March, and we run a faculty workshop in June. We'll be getting underway on Sunday, June 4th for the week. And we'd love to have more applications from AU PhD students and AU faculty. We do have faculty coming from all over the world for these workshops, and would love to have more applications from AU. We also have, through the project, a book series, Bridging the Gap book series with Oxford University Press that I co-edit with Steve Weber from UC Berkeley and Bruce Jenelson from Duke University, who are my two co-PIs for the Carnegie grant. And we have our first books coming out next spring. And that faculty member is going to, at another institution in town, is going to use that book to go from associate to full. And we are very keen on working with Oxford because we really want to make sure that academics, especially junior faculty who published in the series, would be publishing with a high-quality university press in order to, we never try to harm people in the work. We do try to assist them. I think the thing is, for me, it's the most important insight, and Scott alluded to this with one of his examples, is it's not about moving into the space and being non-academic. It's taking your academic expertise and broadening the audience who can benefit from it. So you take your book or your major article that you've written for an academic audience, and then you think about the ways in which you can use that research in other formats. I would always encourage you to get as many publications as you can off a particular research project, and you can write for if you have that high-impact academic journal or the university press book, but then, spin off a piece for a policy journal, spin off a piece for an op-ed, spin off a piece for a blog post. There's so many different outlets that you can really draw attention to your work, and, a lot of that will also enable you to reach academic audiences that you might not otherwise, who then you may be able to utilize for your own academic work. We're in a great partnership now with SOC, with something called The Conversation. We have a membership in The Conversation, and this is an outlet that, because of The Conversation's relationships with other media outlets, so you publish a piece there, and then it gets republished in places like Time, Scientific American, Huffington Post, other places. We have a number of our faculty who are here have published there, and have had hits of like 20 or 30,000 on a particular piece. One of our faculty members, Ji Young Lee, just had one that came out this morning on the 4 things you need to know about North and South Korea. So taking our academic work and applying it to giving it a broader impact. I just want to say a couple things about the 2 different workshops. Again, so that you can tell your PhD students, and also if you're interested in the faculty workshop, they are slightly different. The PhD workshop, we know that we have PhD students coming in, and it's part of the idea behind the workshop, not all of whom will go into academia upon finishing the PhD. And for the 14 or so years we've been running that workshop, it's really provided what we consider a safe space for people who are in departments where, especially when we started the project, not so much now, but when we started the project, a lot of those people in their departments, if they were seen as wanting to go into a non-academic career, it was really sort of taboo to even discuss that with their PhD committees. As the market has gotten harder and harder, that has changed, but that really is really focused on thinking about how to generate policy-relevant research questions. We use scenario analyses and run the folks through a set of scenario analyses to try to think about future drivers of world politics and the ways in which you can then sort of think about, a question that you could ask today, the answer to which 5 years from now would be useful to people. So, you go do your research, and by the end of it, hopefully you have something that will be of interest down the road. It's been very interesting to sort of do this comparative scenario analysis. It's not designed to be predictive. I mean, in fact, it's sort of a problem when they turn out to pass, because then you have to toss that scenario out and come up with another one. So 2006, we had one, a scenario in which there was a crisis in the U.S. housing and banking sector that caused a global financial crisis. I should say we do every year we go somewhere internationally and do sort of a scenario workshop, and that year members of the team went and presented that scenario to, actually there were 2 trips, one in Europe and one in Hong Kong, and it was seen as totally preposterous, and why would anyone waste their time on thinking about that type of crisis. The other one was 2009. We had one we called Power to the People. There was an event in the Middle East that touched off a series of protests, and regimes were toppling, and authoritarian rulers were scrambling to stay in control, and so then we couldn't use that one either. But the key thing is the way in which those are used to generate research questions. So there were a whole set of questions on that second one in terms of the response of authoritarian leaders to those types of protests that would make for great research questions. And then just to mention our International Policy Summer Institute for Faculty, I mentioned it'll be in early June this year. I mean, it's always in early June, and hopefully people might be interested in the future. So those are people who are already faculty members, so we don't spend so much time on the research question part, but really on how do you translate your academic research, how do you think about different types of communication, different types of audience. So for example, with respect to the policy audience, there's a big difference between trying to reach somebody in the executive branch versus reaching somebody on the Hill and perhaps providing testimony versus trying to get the attention of somebody in the intelligence community, because the people in those different areas are doing different things. Somebody in an international organization, somebody in an NGO. These are all very different audiences for your work. We also do media training, and we do a lot of, we bring in folks, op-ed editors, blog editors, and then we do our own media training and everybody gets taped, and then we bring in producers to critique the tapes. I always enjoy that because I'm not on the tape, and it can be, be a little tough for people, but has proven to be very successful. And we had one person who soon after was on The Daily Show, and she was very excited to use all the things she had learned at the Summer Institute in The Daily Show. But I'll just close by saying that the important thing to remember is whether it's The Daily Show or any other kind of media appearance, you're being asked to be on the media because you're an academic and you have academic knowledge. If they wanted to get a pundit, there are plenty of pundits that they can get. And you watch these people all the time and think, oh my God, they don't know anything. So that's not why they're having you on. So your goal is not to go on and sound like a pundit. Your goal is to go on and as quickly and clearly as you can, take your academic knowledge and use that to make points that will enlighten the broader public and perhaps the policy audience. And then the last thing I would just say, something that we've done recently with the project, we've convened now 2 meetings with provosts from around the country, including our own, who's been at both, which is very nice. And I think the important thing there is recognition that that higher levels of university leadership are very eager to see their faculty members do work that has high impact both academically and then for the broader society. And universities today are under tremendous pressure to show their value to society, whether, especially the publics with state legislatures, but of course even for the private universities with boards or parents, donors, students, and others. And so I think we'll continue to see this trend of interest in having both academic and policy and public impact. And I do hope we'll get some AU applications, both PhD and faculty, for the programs we run here through Bridging the Gap. Thanks.
Barbara, we'll take questions at the end, so write them down.
I apologize. I have a cold. My voice is about 3 octaves lower than normal. I'll try to get through this. The School of Public Affairs has been working for the last 3 years on trying to support faculty to get the high-quality research they do, referencing the kind of point Jim made and the one that Scott made about it's got to start with good research. But once you start with good research, what we've been doing is trying to find ways to get that word out beyond the traditional top quality journal. I mean, we've got faculty who can do that in spades, but that's where it has been stopping, is at the top quality journals. And so for the last 3 years, we've had a program called Excellence with Impact, which has been emphasizing taking that excellent research and getting it to broader audiences. And it has required a couple of different components. First of all, you got to have faculty who want to do it. There are some faculty who still want to just publish in the top journals and don't bother me with anything else. That's the only reference point they have are their other academic peers. The target audience for us, we're in DC, we're a School of Public Affairs. The target audience is the broader policy community as well as the broader international scholarly community. So we have emphasized a couple of things. We have brought in policy, public affairs, government, justice, law, and criminology, people who are internationally ranked scholars elsewhere, brought them in for 2 days, 2 weeks, a semester, a year, whatever they were available to do. So we are building a network of people who are part of the School of Public Affairs, even if they're at the University of Barcelona or the University of Michigan or somewhere else. So they come in, I think of it on, it's kind of the Harvard model. Everybody says they were at Harvard, but when you ask really how long were they were there for a month. And they talk forever about when I taught at Harvard. That's what's going on. And so that's what we're doing. We're making a family of people who are part of American University's School of Public Affairs. They come in, they get to know how great our faculty are, they're impressed with our students, they love the location we've got, and they go away and they become some of our best advertisers. not just about recruiting students, but about the quality of the scholarship we've got. So then our faculty members get invited to be part of a collaboration on some work that's being done elsewhere. So it's a multiplier effect for the quality of the work our faculty do at a personal level. But we do, so we work on it as a interpersonal scholarly networks that multiplies the impact of our faculty's research. And then they go out and they can do this interesting expanded research and collaborations with others. But we also have been working to expand the reach of the research our faculty members are doing individually. So we work hard, I think of it as a multiplier effect. We give them, once we have a faculty member who's engaged in high quality research and willing to do more, we give them financial support to either bring in collaborators to work on finishing up that grant proposal, or to bring in 5 people in the field who are doing work that is complementary to what they're doing. And we'll have a small invitation-only conference, which again multiplies the impact, multiplies the spread of the work, and provides creative energy for everybody who's engaged in that. So we've been supporting that. And then the third piece of it, and this is really important, is the communications piece. And I got to tell you, we have spent a lot of money in the last 3 years ramping up our communications function in the school. And I know the other schools have as well. Believe me, I think you can't have enough. We have media training, we have help with people writing blogs, we have help with people writing op-eds, whatever it is. The event staff, I know Nancy made a point of congratulating the event staff on what a good job you've done here today. You can't, if you have bad communications or poor communications support or poor events management, it doesn't matter what you've done, people leave with a bad impression. So we have spent significantly on the talent we've acquired to help with that. And you have to do that because you have to have a good message to get out to these various audiences. Whether it's the grant writing proposals, our Washington Institute for Public Affairs Research, we support people putting a grant proposal together. That is presentation of concepts. You all know that. But there's the other part of cultivating connections with the policy community. As a School of Public Affairs, we have more than just the scholarly community that we legitimately should be reaching out to, and that is the other part that we emphasize. We spend a lot of time cultivating partnerships, developing collaborations with our organizations in town, the National Academy of Public Administration, the Wilson Institute, the Urban Institute, the DC Lab, on and on. We find ways to work with policy units in town where we can have experts in whatever their particular area work with them. So that is another kind of a multiplier effect. And then we support faculty in whether it's in the policy collaborations or if it's in the grant work that they're doing. So a couple of points. You have to have high quality research or else it's not worth doing any of this. So faculty members have to be willing and come forward with a proposal. It's not, we don't go knock on their door and say, would you be willing? We wait, we say, we're here, give us an idea and we'll support it. So there has to be the faculty energy to start. There has to be the institutional support, and that's where between our grant office and our communications office, we've got the institutional support. And then we have to execute, and we have to execute it well. And we've managed to do that, I think, significantly. In the last 3 years since we've been running this program, we've doubled our faculty research productivity. We've doubled our engagement with external partners. We've worked with the White House Historical Association, with the White House itself, and the like. So we have managed significant connections, and we have people calling us and saying, I'd like to come to your campus, instead of the other way around where we have to call people and say, would you come to our campus, and oh, we'll pay you this much money if you come. So we have become a venue of choice for policymakers. So that's sort of our general overview of what the school's done, but there's a second piece, and that's, I want to share with you some lessons that we learned this last week We hosted the first of the AU Policy Network, and it's embraces everybody on campus who does policy research. Now, a lot of them are in the School of Public Affairs, but not exclusively, certainly. And we brought in 4 different people who have extensive experience in the policy world, and this last week, and we said to them, would you please tell us how you use policy research? So tell us how we should position our research so it's impactful for you. So how do you access it? How do you use it? And what do you need to make it easier for that to happen? And one of our key speakers was Alice Hill, Peter's wife, very talented and accomplished, of course. And so Alice had some great points, but I'm going to report those great points as well as what the other speakers had. We had somebody from the department whose experience was a high-level Department of Education, Alice, high-level White House. We had somebody high-level HHS, and someone high-level in the Pentagon. So these people were serious policy makers. And here are the points they had, and I think they were fabulous. Alice started. Take advantage of the recency bias. In other words, your research, if your research lines up with something that's going on, if you're doing work on North Korea these days, get your work out there. Don't wait 3 weeks. Don't wait 3 months until that manuscript is published. And I got to tell you, I've had faculty who've said to me, I don't want to be interviewed. I don't want this written up because it's not yet ready to be published. And I'm like, you're wasting an opportunity here. So that's part of you got to be prepared to say something definitive before it's fully polished and before it's been through peer review. If you've got confidence in your findings, you got to be willing to talk about them. The second point was that you have to be willing to sell your work to policymakers. You have to tell them why it's important. Don't wait for somebody to knock on your door and say, do you have something to offer me about this particular subject? Instead, if you've got something, get it in front of them. And this is where blogs and Twitter, you can't do much on Twitter except say, hey, by the way, I've got a new paper on this. But I have to tell you, our faculty members who have done that have found the reach of their work is significant. First of all of the media people tell us that's where they go first. So if you want people to know what you're doing, if you want a reporter to call you up and say, could you help me understand that, they're going to find your work there. So I'm not a Twitter aficionado, but that's where the world is. And if you want to be a player in that, you need to learn or have somebody do it for you. The third point is you have to answer relevant questions in your research. So often people will do great research and the interesting, important policy question is right here, and your findings are right here. And you have to be willing to stretch a little bit and say, given the research I've done, I can say this about it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to distort your findings, but you can't say, well, I'm really interested in A, when the question the reporter or the policymaker is wrestling with is B. So you have to figure out what the really important questions are, and the advice here is that think tanks and the nonprofits are where they live or die on this. So they have to be relevant because they're not going to get the funding and they're not going to get the connections. So they can help you if you're not sure. And this is a very important point. Think about the way what you want to do overlaps with what policymakers need. They need answers right away. They need insights right away. They need to know what will and won't work. You don't have to tell them what to do, but you have to give them some sense of where the pitfalls are and where the opportunities are in this. And then this is the fifth point that Alice Hill had. She says, answer your questions in plain language. Write it up in plain English. We all are victims of getting comfortable with our jargon, and that's where a good communication staff will help you. But there are a couple other very important points that some of our other policy experts said, and this is a really important one. You have to be real sensitive to the time asymmetry between how academic cycles work and how the policy world works. People need quick information. They can't wait for you to get it out. So we've got an example of someone whose book is coming out in supposedly 3 weeks. Well, you're experienced. You know about publishers, it gets delayed, the index isn't quite ready, or this or that isn't working. And so, there's a lot of, it's not ready, it's not ready. Well, get the ideas out there, even though you don't have that hard-bound copy yet that you can hold up during the interview. So when policymakers need it, they need it now. They don't need it in 3 weeks. Another important point for your research is that size matters, that academics tend to do either these great big global issues about the nature of truth and humanity, or they do really narrow slices of, how we get specialists and a subspecialty and a subspecialty, and you can say a whole lot about this one particular species of flower, but you can't say anything about an eco-forest. That you have to figure out what you have to offer. Sometimes your questions are too big to be of use to policymakers. Your findings are too grand scale, and sometimes they're too small. So you have to figure out where you want to target your research. And then lastly, when it comes to pulling all this back together, we can talk in the school, we can talk in the university about how important it is to emphasize collaborative research, how important it is to go after research grants, how important it is to do high-impact research. But if we're asking you to do things different from the old scholarly way, if we're asking you to write blogs, we're asking you to do Twitter, we're asking you to do interviews, we're asking you to do op-eds, we have to find ways in our merit and promotion and tenure systems to calculate those things in a way that gives people confidence. I've had my junior faculty members say to me, I spent 6 years in graduate school and then 5 years as an assistant professor learning how to write for journals. And now you're saying I should write op-eds or I should write blogs. They've invested 10 years of their life learning how to do this, and they don't want to change. The world has changed, and they can keep writing that way, but the exchange of information and the pace at which the world works is such. If you want to be relevant, you got to learn how to do this. And so we have to change our metrics to embrace that. And I don't know anybody who's come up with a good one yet. I do in the merit review, but faculty want to know it counts for 5 points, or they want to know it counts for 3 articles. They want it quantified, and I can't do that yet, and I don't know anyone who has quantified that yet. But that's so that's what we're doing in the School of Public Affairs. Is we're emphasizing the high quality research is where you start. You have to have faculty engaged in that research in order to even make a start on this idea of high impact research. But it's not just how many people have cited your work. You can change the field, and I know we have scholars in the room whose work has been seminal enough that it has actually shaped sections of a field or whole fields. That's really important work, but that's only one kind of high impact. The other kind of high impact that we are emphasizing is taking that great scholarship and doing more with it than just publishing it. And so you need the faculty engagement, you need financial support, and that's in the form of giving faculty a little extra financial money to bring in the speakers they need, to bring in their collaborators, and you need the communication support so that people don't have to learn how to reach out to the media. They don't have to do those things. They just have to be present and share their ideas. And so we've done that by having media breakfast, where we invite in 20 different journalists to come in and have 4 different scholars talking about, one of them was on the politics of science, kind of a hot topic the last few years. And the reporters, we had the New York Times, the LA Times, Bloomberg, and the like. It was really a high-powered group. They took notes for an hour and a half. They just wouldn't, they would take notes nonstop because they want that background. And then those people become your go-to people later for when there's a hot story they need a quote on. So engagement, the financial support, and the communications piece. And it all boils down to you're not going to really succeed if you try to do this alone. The individual scholar is the starting point, but your research goes farther if you collaborate. Your research goes farther if you're supported by the institution in these broader means of communicating what you do. Starts with faculty energy. If it's not there, you can't go anywhere. But if you've got smart, if you've got hard work, and you've got talent, and the relevance piece, you can go miles with it, and we've had great success with it.
Thank you. So, Peter, you're next, and you've got the broadest range of faculty as contrasted with the other two. So,
I was going to actually, that's a great segue. So let me start by saying making a confession, which is that I am not in a notably high impact field. My fields are French theory and 19th century French studies. Now, going to a cocktail party and saying people you work in French is probably almost as bad as saying you do root canals, because a lot of people, at least in my generation, have had very, very traumatic times in their French classes.
where are their root canals?
And they're root canals.
At least they're
My
numb when they get out.
tenure book was a classic case of what Barbara was just talking about, and what Scott was talking about earlier. And I'll give you an example of this. My sister and brother-in-law had this parlor game that they played for years. I don't know that they still play it, where they would open up every Christmas, day after Christmas, Boxing Day someday, they'd open up my first book, my tenure book, and they'd read a sentence at random, and they would say, "Do you understand it?"
Have they finished the book
And
yet?
then they would say, "Peter's really smart," and put it away and come back. But that's what we did. I mean, this is a book about French theory, and about the cultural impact, actually, of French theory. But that is what a lot of disciplines were like many, many years ago, and we've really had a significant shift. My most recent book, the one that Scott pulled me away from, and I'll tell you, it's actually, I don't resent it, but I'll tell you I don't resent it, but was a book, a multimedia book called We the Paranoid, meant to be very much forward-facing and facing the world. It was about paranoid style in contemporary culture in the 90s and noughts. Can you imagine how much fun I'd be having now if I were a dean with a project called We the Paranoid? The problem actually is it's probably too easy, right? It's probably too easy to find paranoid everywhere, because it is everywhere. Yeah. But I actually love my job, and I want to tell you why I love my job and why I lord it over Barbara and Jim at all moments about why my job is better. And it's something that Barbara was just talking about, and Nancy was mentioning as well, which is we in the College of Arts and Sciences have this extraordinary range of disciplines. I get to evaluate files about things like G protein coupled receptors, I hope I got that right, and representation theory all the way to, the Gorilla Girls, and everything in between. And that's really, really great. One of the interesting things, though, and it makes the perspective, I think, of an arts and sciences dean kind of interesting, is that you also have a very significant breadth of the way in which work gets evaluated. So there are fields where citation counts, journal impact factors, H indexes really, really matter. If you're in the medical field, those things really, really matter. And the closer you are to medicine, the more, in some ways, they really matter. There are fields like computer science where conference acceptance rates is incredibly important. Conference publications really matter in computer science because it's a very fast-moving field. Most of you around here don't go back to your deans and say, my conference things count, because they don't. But in computer sciences, in fact, they do. Press prestige, very important in the humanities and some of the arts, much less important in some of the other fields. Magazine prestige as well. In the arts, the prestige of the venue, solo shows versus group shows, competitions, graphic design. A lot of the evaluation is how competitive specific competitions are. So we really do have probably very close to the entire range of the way in which impact is measured in the College of Arts and Sciences. Patents as well, probably a little bit less traditional. I don't think we really know what to do with patents in the evaluation thing, and that's something we can talk about. What's interesting is that these also vary from field to field. In other words, an impact factor that is in history or economics or sociology that is amazing might not be all that great with someone like Katie, who's working in a more medical field. So Katie has the advantage, because she's a biologist working on cancer, of having impact factors that someone like Mary Hansen over here in economics has no shot at. But it doesn't mean that Mary's impact factors aren't equally strong to Katie's, right? It's just a question of the field. And that's a very, very important situational analysis that we have to make, I have to do, and that Scott has to do. Ashgate is a very important press in art history. It's not a particularly important press in other fields. And so one of the things you need to know as a dean or as a provost or a president is how important given presses are in given fields. Now, we've also got a whole series of less traditional forms of public impact, media appearances, op-eds, blogs, social media, direct action in the community as well. And I put together a list of College of Arts, shout-outs to College of Arts and Sciences people to shout out to, and I didn't include some others that I could have, and I'm sorry, Mary, Jennifer Steele, Boris Gershman, Celine Marie Pascal, and anyone else I'm missing that I don't have you on the list, because I really appreciate all the work that you all have done in all of this. Matt Hardings, who's back there in the back, blogs about the chemistry of common foods and drinks. My favorite, I think, is gin and tonics, why gin and tonics don't taste like gin or tonic. And even had an NBA. Yeah, that would be good, that'd be good. An NBC appearance on the science of bacon. Naomi Barron has done extensive media appearances, on the impact that technology and electronic devices have had on the way we communicate with one another. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy had done incredible work around Michelle Obama's Reach Higher initiative, creating a series of White House convenings that have very, very, I'm not going to use the word impactful, they have great impact. Rachel Louise Snyder has done some great work in the New Yorker and elsewhere on domestic homicide and domestic violence. Becca Peixoto, you read about her being part of the team that discovered Homo naledi, but Becca is a graduate student, actually, just graduated from the Department of Anthropology. Art Shapiro has done Discovery Channel appearances on visual illusions. Cynthia Miller-Idris has done pieces on extreme nationalism in the New York Times and elsewhere. Kyle Dargan did a great appearance on Bill Moyers talking about the transformation of DC and has a zine called Post No Ills. Andrew Taylor has a long-standing blog called The Artful Manager. Colleen Jennings wrote Hands Up, which has had extraordinary impact in the conversation around race in America. And I would be remiss in not mentioning our colleague Alan Lichtman, who predicted Donald Trump's victory.
And?
Immediately went on the airwaves to predict his impeachment. Recently came out with a book called The Case for Impeachment, and in December received a handwritten scrawled note from Donald Trump on a Washington Post essay, printout of a Washington Post essay about his prediction of Trump's victory, saying, "Professor, congratulations, good job, Donald Trump." 2 months after Alan started predicting his impeachment. So I want to leave you, I'm going to be very brief, but I want to leave you with something that I heard from decorators once. Well, why not? But that actually helps me to think about promotion files, because there are a number of people in this room who are probably saying, give me some information I can use. So I'm going to try to give you some information you can use. What I heard from decorators is a color scheme rule, the 60-30-10 rule. Has anyone heard this? No. So the idea is, you've done it, you've redecorated, Mary, right? I have. The idea is, so I kind of do it here too. The idea is you have a dominant color. In this room it's brown, 60%. You have a 30% color, which is the white here. I'm not sure where we're getting 10. And then a 10% color that's just the accent.
Alarms.
Yeah, exactly, the red alarms. I like it. We'll stick with it, okay? And what it means, you need that 10% to sort of accent it, but you need the 30% to give the dominant, and then 60% to do the dominant, and 30% to be secondary. I've said this to a number of sort of pre-tenure people and people coming up for promotion, but particularly pre-tenure people. I find this very useful for thinking about how you put together a tenure file. The 60%, and this is an ideal case, and I'll qualify this in a minute, but the 60% is the work that's going to get you tenure. Usually traditional work, right? Because as I think Scott's remarks went to this, usually it's traditional work that's going to get you the tenure. right? So in book fields, it's a book. In article fields, it's well-placed articles in the right journals. In a creative field, it may be solo exhibitions, it may be solo performances, it may be conducting a major orchestra, whatever, okay? But that's the main thing on which you're going to get tenure. The 30% can be something different. It can be a different field. You know, we have some people who, for example, I have someone in our school whom I just mentioned who's first and foremost a journalist, but wrote a novel, and the novel kind of counts as that 30% because she also writes novels. And then 10% can be something else. So let me, rather than try to convince you this, let me give you sort of 3 ways to understand this. One may be you do 60% in your primary area of publication, 30% in the secondary area, and 10% in a third. So you're moving. You've made your reputation in one area, but you're moving into another area, and then possibly into a third. It could be 60% books and articles, 30% media appearances, 10% your blog. It could be, if you're an artist, 60% artistic productions of various sorts, appearances as an actor, as a director, as a choreographer, whatever. 30% articles, so the articles kind of help push you over the top, and 10% community engagement, right? I find this rule very helpful because it ramifies and goes in many different directions that can be helpful to thinking about things. Now, having said this, I want to be very clear that there are many, many people who get tenured and promoted at American University and elsewhere who are 100% in this. That's great. That's just great. Because if you're, and particularly in some fields where your field is kind of cumulative and your work builds upon one another, this is particularly true probably of the sciences, your work is building upon one another, you don't want to deviate too much. But in many fields, it's actually a very helpful way to think about things. A 50-50 split can work beautifully because you're really making your name in 2 distinct areas or in 2 different ways of promoting your work. You know, books on the one hand and media appearances on the other. The point is, and I'll end on this, is that this is an ideal, and it's a way to make an already strong case just go over the top. And that's when people come in and talk to me about tenure and promotion. I say, okay, can you get tenure and promoted on the basis of the 60%, but what's that other thing that's going to help you push you over the top to make it a slam dunk so that the referees are going to say, why didn't you promote this person sooner? Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. We have 2 microphones in the room, and I'm going to make a couple comments, but raise your hands now if you want a microphone to be brought to you. Dania has one, and thank you. Jonathan has the other one. I came up with 4 J's before I would have gotten to Jonathan. And so get the microphones to them while I make a couple of other comments. I spent a lot of time before I came to AU working for Capitol Hill. I was in the Congressional Research Service, and both as a policy analyst as well as a librarian. And one of the particular things that I learned working there, when you are writing for policy makers or for legislators, we were constantly being cautioned that, one, they're not experts in your field. They are experts in something. In many cases, it's being elected, but you have to write for them, for where they are, and get them to understand what it is. So as one example that was given is if you are writing about Medicare, if you're writing it in a way that your grandmother does not understand it, rewrite. You've got to continue to write for what that expected audience is. So they've given you on this panel many examples of the kinds of audiences that go beyond the scholarly field. Go watch those shows a couple times. Get them on YouTube. Do whatever it is to get them to see the kind of audience that might be there, how the people who have been on those shows are putting their sentence structures together, the kinds of examples they're using, because they're being brought to talk to a particular audience. And I think that makes a big difference as you begin to do these. Remember, if you're writing for somebody that it's written, you have a very long breath when you're reading. You have much shorter breath when you're speaking. So if you're drafting remarks that a policy member is going to be delivering, make sure that there are stopping points and shorter sentences, both for their ability to deliver and somebody else's ability to comprehend. It makes a huge difference as you're going from one medium to the other in the way that you structure paragraphs and you even structure sentences. And then I want to point out one of Peter's faculty that he didn't, and it's Lisa Leff, who this year won the Scholar Teacher Award. And if you have read her most recent book, The Archive Thief, which happens to sit in the world that I belong to. Another one of my jobs at the Library of Congress was to be the chief of rare books. And this is about a man who was uneducated but highly scholared in particular fields of archives. And he was so well presented and represented that they would actually leave him alone in an archive, something you would never do. And he proceeded to rip them off with a intentional purpose of getting them safely out of Europe and into Israeli archives and into American archives. He wanted this literature and these archives protected, and feared they would not be protected in Europe. But her book reads like a mystery novel. I mean, it's pretty incredible in the way that she has taken a scholarly work and told stories in a way that are utterly fascinating. With that, hands up. Who's
Got a
first?
question over here.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for your remarks. So it seems like you're encouraging people who publish, faculty who publish, to think beyond the traditional box of scholarly publications. I understand that. But when it comes to a book, it still must be a book that can be held in hand. The minute you say, I have an online book, everyone thinks you have a how-to-do book, and that has no cachet. And yet, the readership would be so much more if the books were online. They wouldn't cost $96, and they would be read in many more spaces. So do we have new thinking on this one, or is it just the book that I can stand for a launch and say, here's my book, and I sign it?
Let me do the librarian answer to this, and then let the rest of you do the scholarly answer.
Thank you.
The librarian answer is that we are getting electronic books from major publishers. As an example, we have, through the consortia, we are now purchasing everything other than the handbooks from Oxford University Press. We are getting online access immediately, and we are getting one print copy to go in our off-site shelving facility, shared among all of us. So you need to be cautious of the publisher. That carries as much import, I think, in many fields as the work itself does. But not every electronic book is just a ripoff. There are very, very scholarly presses, and the librarians would be happy to consult with you if you would like to use us to investigate legitimate electronic scholarly presses that you might submit to. Do you all have any opinion about?
Well, my only thing is that I think the important thing to remember is, I mean, when it comes to people evaluating your work, the evaluation is focused on the impact that the work has. I mean, who's using the work? How many people, what kind of impact is it having in your field? So I think it's less about the particular medium and more about, who is it affecting? If there's only 3 or 4 people who find the work interesting, then, makes it less impactful than if you have a lot of people who are able to draw on the work. I think the challenge that was mentioned already is the challenge in the sort of the non-academic work is how do you measure impact of other types of work? And we're with Jessica, we're on the political science side, we're actually looking at, we've been talking with the American Political Science Association on a project on how to measure policy and public impact, because it is, because I think that's more challenging than the academic impact, where we look at citations, we look at other ways that I think Peter, in certain of the fields that you have, there are other ways that you can measure it, but the policy and public impact thing is kind of, is a policymaker reading it? I don't know. How do you know? How many people watched your appearance on CNN? I mean, or read a policy report. I mean, I think that's much trickier, and which is why we're having that conversation. And one of the things that they've raised over at Political Science Association is, how would you measure an app? I mean, what if you developed an app that was really important? They had a scholar who came to them. A person was in the international development field, had a very interesting app that the person was working on. It would have made will make a big difference in people's lives. The person was saying, well, I think I need to put this aside because I've got to focus on, trying to get an article in the American Political Science Review. Well, what's going to have the larger impact over time? I think that's something that we're going to really have to wrestle with.
Next question. Who's got the microphone?
We do, so.
Raise your hand. Over here, Jonathan?
Hi, Brian Forrest, School of Public Affairs. A lot of serious scholars see some tension between impactful research and research that's done in search of truth for its own sake. When George Stigler received the Nobel Prize in economics, about 30 years ago, he was asked, how do you differ from Milton Friedman, his colleague at University of Chicago? And he said, Milton Friedman is trying to change the world. I'm trying to understand it. Was Stigler wrong?
My opening remarks were about pursuit of inquiry and following your own leads in terms of knowledge, and that one of the things that universities need to be absolutely clear is that we support and encourage all forms of inquiry, including basic research that may not have any relevance for 20, 30, or more years. That's what a university is about. We are talking about, in a narrower sense, what are some things we can do at American University for those who are interested. And that includes, and I'm very concerned about, the support for basic, pure research in a climate where 54% of the presidents have said that we are not connected with the rest of the world. Now, in order to have the support for public higher education requires the legislature and the public to feel this is worth spending money on. And in the public universities, it would be 60, 40, 20 in terms of the use of time, of which 60% or more would go towards research. That's got to have support from the public to continue. We have strong interest remaining in the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and a myriad of other institutions that provide the core work to do basic research. Without if everybody was in our community and in the great universities around the country only did pure research of which was of interest to the individual scholar, that would be a death knell to higher education. And so we have to recognize that there are a variety of different ways of communicating and moving our work forward. And it may take 30 years. It may take longer in terms of its impact. So neither are right or wrong, and that is the beauty of the university, is that we welcome and support, and with meaningful resources, the time to pursue one's interest. And you know what? If you change your interest, that's okay too. That's the nature of our setting, is you change your mind and you want to work in a different field, and you providing that kind of creative energy and spark and interest in communicating. That's what we're here for. That's why we have tenure. That's why we have a supportive system. So my answer is that it's important for, at least as your provost, to give a message that basic research is important, applied research is important, creative work is important, innovation is important, controversial work, important, being in disagreement and debate, important, and not following a narrow path of only talking to people who agree with you or share a certain point of view. University does that, we'll be healthy, we'll maintain our public support, and we need that support if we're going to continue with the kind of work we want to do. So.
Was that the last word, or do we have other questions? There's a question here.
I just have a little follow on to that because what we've been talking a lot at this conference is kind of metrics and quantification and scoring, and at least in the sessions that I've been in, and those are really important discussions to have. But this last question, I think the broader theme that many are interested in is how we're differentiating between kind of the type of societal engagement that generates that buy-in and that valuing of universities as institutions of higher learning and higher education with kind of the positioning and this really strategic dissemination of research. Because, for example, I learned about my colleague's book, The Archive Thief, because she came and presented it at our synagogue, right? Because that was a very important public engagement effort with the community that was deeply interested in this work, right? It wasn't the sort of kind of dissemination of findings that we necessarily typically refer to when we're discussing policy or public impact. So I was just wondering if you could speak to how we balance some of the community engagement efforts that my colleagues at SIS are doing in terms of race in DC or public health issues in DC with kind of these more strategic, here are how my findings refer to a broader public policy issue, and here's how I seek to, come up with solutions to that.
Is this the time to talk about the new center?
Well, I just want to say, we see this in lots of different dimensions, right? We just ran an SIS course for Ollie this spring, right? And we had
You may have to explain Ollie.
Oh, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. So they run this program down at the Spring Valley building, and just mentioned the SIS course is the most heavily subscribed. But anyway, it's a course on global affairs. We have a different faculty member speaking each week. We've got several hundred people from the community who come out to learn something about U.S. and Russia, or what's going on in Brazil, or whatever the environmental issues or whatever the topic is. So I think that it's, I think what's important is just thinking about there's so many different ways that you can have impact through your work. The peace building work that we've been doing over the last year after Ray Chambers spoke at our graduation last year, and we've been doing all this work with high school, middle school, and elementary school students in the district, right? We're hopeful that that's going to pay off with real impact over a really long period of time, with kids who otherwise would not have been exposed to the work that was being done at American University. So I think it's a great question and a great, there's so many people here who do things in the community and probably don't even really think about the fact that a lot of what they're doing in the community actually is related to the academic research that they're doing, and that, in fact, lots of people in the community are interested in the work that's being done, even if they can't always read every sentence in the book. I think it's a great point about thinking about the different ways that you can have impact on, again, from elementary school kids all the way up to retirees who are coming to Ollie.
So with that, I am going to close this out because I know you all have probably at least a few phone messages to return before you go to your next session. But I need to do a couple of things. The first is to, Stefan Kramer should have been listed in that planning list that helped to put together this conference, and I'm sorry I admitted you at the beginning. My second comment is I would like to get an email from each one of you over the course of the next week telling me, one, what you got out of this, was it worth it? And second, telling us what you'd like to have next year. We would like to continue to do this. We think that bringing faculty together right at the end of the term, before you set off on your summer research or your other summer projects, is kind of a good time to do it. And it's a great time for junior faculty to talk with senior faculty as well. And I know we've had some graduate students who have signed up for this session as well, and I think that's terrific too. So if you write to Davenport, it will go to the Dav, the coffee shop upstairs. They do get most of my best mail, I must say. Sometimes they shouldn't, but you could. But if that's all you remember, write to them and they'll forward it. A couple of the Provost's early notes went there. If you write to Davenport and leave off the T, it will come to me. And with that,
Start offering free coffee.
Is that what it takes? That's all it takes to get my whole name. I would like to thank my colleagues for taking the time out of their days, particularly right after they have presided at 1 for the deans and at 5 for the provost commencements. And thank all of you for coming as well. Oh, is my I should. I know. I just changed my name.
I figured that talking about that breadth is
Well, we do different stuff for different,
but it flowed well from one.
Get people thinking outside their level.